Here's what I want to do. I want to ask for 8 brave volunteers to come up to the stage. Don't worry, I'm not going to embarrass you. Let me get 8 people. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You guys can come on up to the stage. All right, there we go. I think we got 8 right there. If you have 9, that's fine. We're going to play a little game, and you guys have maybe played this game growing up, maybe in schools, maybe you played it with some friends. We're going to play the game of telephone. So you guys line up next to each other. All right? And here's how this game works. If you haven't played it, I'm going to whisper something to Michael over here, and Michael is going to repeat it to the next person, to the next person, to the next person, and then we're going to see what comes out at the end. All right? They might ruin the illustration and get it right, but let's see what happens. All right, they may get this right, but let's see. What do you got?
Jesus walked on water, and I don't remember the rest.
That's it? Okay. All right, let's give it up for them. Thank you all. You guys missed like half of the sentence, but it's all good. The sentence was, Jesus walked on water while whistling worship songs. So you guys missed half of it. And here's the thing, this game of telephone, we play it and people use it as a metaphor to make a point, and that is the unreliability of human recollection. The unreliability of human recollection, or in simple terms, we're not as sharp as we think we are, right? Our ability to listen and process and pass on information is not as good as we think it is. And there's a reason for it. Think about when you grow up. You're taught how to speak. You're taught how to read. You're taught how to write. But think about it. No one teaches you how to listen. No one teaches you how to listen. And here's why I think that is. A few weeks ago, I took my daughter, Madeline. She turned 4. I took her to her 4-year physical exam. And one of the things that they do at your 4-year exam is they do a hearing test. So they put the headphones on her, and they tell her, if you can hear a beep in your left ear, raise your left hand. If you can hear a beep in your right ear, raise your right hand. And she does the thing, and she passes the test, and they say, all right, she is good to go. She can hear now. But here's what I know to be true as Maddie's dad. Her ability to hear does not equal to her ability to listen. Right? There's a very real difference between being able to hear and being able to listen, and we've confused the two, and so no one's ever taught what it means to be a good listener. In fact, we have 3 kids under 5, and I found that most of parenting toddlers involves trying to get them to go from hearing us to listening to us. And it hit me this week as I was preparing this message. I'm not very different from my kids. I struggle with this at times too. In fact, I'll share a story with you all. Earlier this year, I got caught not listening. All right, I was on the phone with my wife, and she was on a 30-minute drive home, and she was telling me all about her day and the appointment she just had. I was at home. I had the headphones in. You know, I'm a multitasker. I had the headphones in. I'm doing dishes. I'm cleaning up the house, and then I'm sitting on the phone, sitting on the couch, kind of scrolling as she's talking. And then I heard the words that stopped me in my tracks. She said, "So what do you think about that?" And you know how it is. Maybe you've been there. There's times where you can piece together some of the info and say, like, yeah, you said this part. I really like that part. But this time, I froze. I honestly had no idea what she was saying because I was so distracted. And I said, "I'm sorry, I wasn't listening." My wife was gracious, and she repeated the story again, and I finally got it. But you know this to be true, and I know this to be true, that we're not always good at listening, although we can hear. Now, this isn't breaking news for us, but why does it matter that we as a people need to go from hearing to being able to listen to others well. We're in part 4 of this series called Emotionally Healthy Relationships, and like I said, it's based on a discipleship course by Pete Scazzaro and Jerry Scazzaro. And at the core of this course is Jesus' understanding of the greatest commandment and his teaching on the greatest commandment. And here's what it is, and we've talked about this the last few weeks, but just to recap, Matthew 22, Jesus says this: the greatest commandments, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it: love your neighbor as yourself. And over the last 4 weeks, what we've identified is that many of us know what it means to love God, to pray, to read the Bible, to follow his commandments, to go to church, to lead life groups, to be generous. Yet, many of us lack the proper skills to be able to love others well through emotionally healthy relationships. So we do all the church activities, but we don't know how to deal with conflict or letdowns when it comes to our relationships. And according to Paul, who wrote a majority of the New Testament, in 1 Corinthians, he said that we can do all the church things. In fact, we can even have the gifts of the Holy Spirit inside of us and live those things out. But if we lack the ability to love others well and love others unconditionally, then our activity for God means nothing. And the crux of this series was this: that loving others well is the defining characteristic of being a Christian, or the defining characteristic of Christian behavior. And as we dive into part 4 of this series, here's what I want to say: listening well to others might be the most critical element to healthier relationships, especially when it comes to practical skills. Any spouses already doing this to your husbands or spouses? Yes, we got a couple in the room. Martin Buber, the famous Jewish philosopher, he says this: that for most of us, our conversations are like the one that I had with my wife, Crystal. They're one-way streets. And he says it this way: they are monologues disguised as dialogues. Most of our conversations are monologues disguised as dialogues. When it comes to our ability to be in emotionally healthy relationships, one of the things that we can learn is that you will never be fully satisfied in your relationship with others until you can go from simply hearing into fully embracing what it means to listen to another person. And that's what we're going to dive into today. Before we do that, I'm going to do a little quiz with you guys. I already took the quiz, so I know my answer and my score. But I want you to take your phones out, or if you got pens, you can tally the score along. I'm going to ask you 10 questions, and you're going to tally how many of these out of the 10 that you can confidently answer yes to. So tally your scores for these 10 statements and see if you can confidently answer yes to how many of these. You guys ready? All right. Number 1, yes or no: my close friends would describe me as a responsive listener. Yes or no? Number 2, when people are upset with me, I am able to listen to them without being defensive. When people are upset with me, I am able to listen to them without being defensive. Number 3, I listen not only to the words people say, but also to the feelings behind their words and their body language. Number 4, I have little interest in judging other people or quickly giving my opinion to them. Number 5, I am able to validate another person's feelings with empathy. All the dudes just put no on that one. Number 6, I am aware of my defensive mechanisms in stressful conversations. For example, appeasing, ignoring, blaming, distracting. I am aware of those things, especially in stressful conversations. Number 7, I am profoundly aware of how the family I was raised in has shaped my present listening style. Number 8, I ask for clarification when listening rather than fill in the blanks or make assumptions. Got 2 more. Hang in there. Number 9, I don't interrupt to get my point across when another person is speaking. And I give people, number 10, I give people my undivided attention when they are talking to me. All right, tally up your scores. See how many out of the 10 you said yes to. If you got 10 out of 10, we can swap places. You can come up here and teach us what it means to listen. But if you're like me, chances are that you scored low. And by the way, I know some of y'all are proud of yourselves right now. Like, I got a lot of these. If you feel good about it, if you want the honest truth and the honest answer, take this quiz and give it to your spouse and have them answer it on your behalf. Or take this quiz and give it to your closest friend and have them answer it on your behalf and see what the difference might be. The quiz is not about making us feel bad about listening, but we do need to realize that listening is a lost art, and naturally, it doesn't come easy to us. Pete Scazzaro introduces this new idea in this course of what it means to go from being hearers to listeners, and he calls this skill incarnational listening. Can everybody say incarnational listening? Let's do it one more time. Incarnational listening. Now, this idea of incarnational listening goes back to Jesus' life. In theological terms, Jesus is God incarnate. And this word incarnate came about in the 1500s as Bible translators were trying to figure out how to communicate the humanity of Jesus. And this word incarnate is what they came up with. Jesus is God incarnate. And that word there means to take physical form, or carne is in there, literally to become flesh. So when we say Jesus is God incarnate, what we mean is that Jesus is God in flesh. We find this in the book of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. In verse 14 it says, the Word, or Jesus, the fulfillment or manifestation of God's spoken truths and promises, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. So this is what it means when we use this theological term that God became God incarnate, which is Jesus put flesh and bones on, and Jesus made his dwelling among us, or in other words, Jesus steps into our world by becoming one of us. Why? All throughout the history of the universe, and we see it all throughout the Old Testament, the people of God were trying to strive to meet the standards of God, yet they continue to fail. And so God would raise up prophets to speak on his behalf, and they would fail. God would raise up kings, and the kings would fail, and judges, and more prophets, and so on. People could never meet the standards of a holy God, and so God himself steps into our world, becomes us, so he can take the punishment that you and I deserve, and in taking our punishment, and not just dying, but because he was buried and because he rose again, death and sin are defeated, and you and I now, our debts of our past are canceled. Now we are sons and daughters of the Most High. This is the gospel message. This is what the Bible teaches, right? So God became flesh and dwells among us. It's this big theological idea, essentially, that Jesus steps into our world. Jesus steps into our experiences. The book of Hebrews says it this way: we have a high priest who experienced even the temptations that we experience. We have a God who has experienced the life that we've experienced, yet he did not sin. So why do we say all this? When it comes to this idea of incarnational listening, it signifies a similar idea to Jesus putting flesh and bones on, or Jesus entering our world, that when we go from hearing to incarnational listening, we become people who enter the world of others. We become people through our listening, enter the experiences of others, and as a return, we become people who love others well. Now, in Jesus' life, we see a model for this because Jesus was very conversational. He went at his own pace, and he had interactions with people of all different backgrounds. Jesus, in fact, one stat says that of the 132 encounters that Jesus had with people recorded in the New Testament, 6 of those were in the temple, 4 of those were in the synagogue, 122 of those happened outside of the church in mainstream areas of life. Most of Jesus' interactions happened outside of church, in conversations, or for us at grocery stores, or at gyms, or walks throughout our neighborhood. And Jesus had conversations and interactions with people of all different backgrounds. Like Nicodemus, who was a religious leader, Jesus spends time engaging in a conversation with him. Or Matthew, a tax collector, Jesus engages him and brings him on as a disciple. Matthew was someone that would have been hated in that context. Or Jesus stops to speak to a Samaritan woman who was considered an enemy of the state. Or Zacchaeus, who was a thief and hated by people in that town. Or a rich young man who stops him in his track to ask him some questions. Jesus repeatedly stopped to have conversations with people. Now, here's the thing. If it was me and I was having conversations with people, I would spend a lot of my time telling people the answers. Like if I was Jesus, I'd be telling them everything I know about everything. I got all the answers so I can give it to you. But look at this stat. It's pretty fascinating. Jesus himself asked 307 questions that are recorded in the New Testament. He was asked 183 questions, and of those 183 questions, Jesus only answered 3 of them. Jesus only answered 3 of 183 questions he was asked, yet he himself in conversations asked 307 questions. questions. What does this teach us about Jesus' model for communication and conversation? Jesus was interested in entering into the experience or thought process of others. That's why he asked. He asked so that he could learn. And it doesn't mean that he agreed with everything that the other person said. In fact, a lot of times he asked questions to probe where they were coming from so he could lead them to the truth. But the difference between us and Jesus, or I speak for myself and Jesus, is that I don't always want to enter into people's world. I want them to enter into my world. Like, I want to tell them, right? We want to tell them about our stuff, our plans, our dreams, our desires, the way that our week went, our thoughts, our opinions. You've all been in conversations, right, where you talk to somebody and they spent 20 to 30 minutes talking about the week they had, and then you don't get to say anything. Or we've all been in conversations with people where you're talking to someone and you know they're hearing you, but in their mind they're preparing their answer to respond to you, that they're not really listening. We've all been in conversations where you say something to one person and their whole motive and goal is to be the one-upper, right? I can be the one-upper at times. If one of y'all told me, hey, it's getting chilly out here, I would say, no way. I'm from New York. Like, we used to walk in 2 feet of snow barefoot. You know, we never did that, but I would one-up. Like, we one-up people when they tell us things. Or you're in that family group chat, right, and you want to celebrate that your child is now able to recite the ABCs, and they respond with a picture of their child reading a book. It's like, I just want to tell you about my child, you know? Or you tell that person that you made this food from a culture for the first time. You say, hey, I made this Italian food for the first time, and their response immediately is, well, my grandmother makes it this way or that way, and she spends lots of time and energy on it. And this is what happens in our conversations. We have a hard time saying, hey, tell me more about that. Can you share that with me? Can I learn more about it? Are you ever going to do it again? Why? It's so unnatural for us to pause and to go from hearing to listening to the point that we want to enter into the world of others. And if there's any sermon that I've preached to myself, this is definitely one of those. I have a hard time entering into people's world because I'm always in a rush. You got things to do. Like, I could be texting and you could talk to me at the same time. In fact, I encourage you. I'm like, no, I got it. Keep talking, you know. Meanwhile, I'm not really listening. And this goes beyond casual conversations. In his book, What Predicts Divorce, psychologist Dr. John Gottman, he identified the 4 most problematic types of communication in relationships. And this book, by the way, is based on studies with over 40,000 couples. And you know what the number one reason he found for why relationships end? It's this one word, contempt. And you're going, I don't even know what that means. I had to look it up too. Contempt, here's what it means. When someone feels contempt, they feel unworthy of love. They feel unworthy of attention. And one of the main reasons that partners or spouses feel contempt is because they have not been listened to. So think about this scenario, right? You might think that going from hearing to listening is not a big deal, but think about the scenario between a husband and a wife. Every day, a wife wants to talk to her husband about her work situation. The husband is quick to offer advice and cuts his wife off. He interrupts her because he already knows what she's going to talk about. He already knows what she's going to complain about. He already knows what her frustrations are, and after all, he's got things to do, like he's got to go on Instagram and scroll through. He's got to go watch that game. So he cuts her off and offers quick advice. Now, a few days of this pattern, what happens is that spouse now feels a little disrespected. Like, he keeps cutting me off. Like, I don't really want that advice, but he keeps interrupting me, and he's always in a rush, and it kind of feels rude, right? Now, go from a few days of that behavior to a few months, or to a few years of that behavior. The spouse is no longer just thinking that her husband is in a rush. She now believes that she must not have anything interesting or important to say. And the feeling that she feels in that moment is contempt, unworthy of love or unworthy of attention. And this is what our inability to listen to others well can lead to: emotional unhealth. And so what does the spouse do? Next time you want to say something, she does the same thing. And now you have 2 people that have drifted away from one another. Think about the marriages that could be saved by spouses choosing to practice this one skill of listening before speaking. There would be less political divisions if people would choose to listen before speaking. There would be better relationships between parents and children if we just chose to listen, to enter their world. Friendships would be better. I wonder how many church splits could be avoided if people chose to listen and enter into the experience or thought process of another person. How much anger and resentment would not stir up in our hearts if we first listened? How many wars would be prevented if people listened? How much more united would our churches be if we just listened to each other? How much more love would there be between neighbors if we just listened to each other and entered into the experience of another person? Now, going from hearing to listening is hard work. And every single one of the skills that we've learned in this series is hard work. It's almost like Pete Scazzero uses illustration of breaking your bones and putting them back in order. It's painful, but it's relearning what it means to be a new person. By the way, this is what discipleship is. Becoming a new creation in Christ daily, putting off our old selves. And it is painful at times because many of us, we've spent our whole lives hearing and not listening. David Osberger, he has this great quote. He says this, "Being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they are almost indistinguishable." Being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they are almost indistinguishable. Henry Nouwen, he says it this way, when we care for others, it means we are first present to that person. That's what it means to care for others, that we are first present to that person. And from experience, you know that those who care for you become present to you. When they listen to you. When they speak to you. Their presence is a healing presence because they accept you on your own terms and they encourage you to take your own life seriously. Now, at times, we can confuse this to think that just because we listen to another person, that means we have to compromise our beliefs. It's not true. We look at the life of Jesus. Jesus, most of his questions, most of his interactions were with people that disagreed with him. He did not compromise himself. He kind of hung between the two worlds of God's kingdom coming, but not yet. That there was brokenness, there was sin in the world. Now, all throughout the series, we've been looking at different skills, right? The ability and the knowledge that we're to love God and the knowledge that we're to love others is important. So the knowledge that you should leave here and listen to others is important. But the problem has always been that we know we should listen, but we've never had the proper skills to do so. So in his course, Pete outlines 6 skills for incarnational listening. And Ben, y'all can begin to come on up. 6 skills for incarnational listening. So this is very practical, and you can put it into practice this week. Try it out with your spouse, or with a friend, or with a neighbor even. You guys ready for the 6 skills? All right. Number 1, give the person that is speaking to you your full attention. I know, it's groundbreaking stuff, right? Like your mind is blown. But how many times throughout the week, just look at this past week, has someone been speaking to you, whether it's your kid or your spouse or a coworker? You know what? This morning, I'll just confess, there was someone speaking to me and I had my phone out and they said something and I said, and then I realized I'm doing it. And I put my phone away. We almost have to catch ourselves and retrain ourselves to actually engage in entering the experience of another person. So number 1, give the person your full attention. So if your spouse comes to you this week and says, hey, I want to talk to you about my work situation, put your phone away. Put it in another room. Turn the TV off. In fact, get your body language straight. If you're washing the dishes, clean yourself up. Sit across from your spouse. Look them in the eye and say, tell me all about it. That person deserves our full attention. My wife and I were in this cohort, and they had us practicing some of these skills, and it was the most awkward thing we've ever had to do in our life. So here's what they said. You're going to turn to one another, and you're going to look at each other, and you're going to tell yourselves, one person is going to tell the other person the most demanding thing that's happening in their life right now. And everything in me, even just shifting my posture to look at my wife as she's speaking and making eye contact, everything in me wants to do the opposite. Like full devotion and full attention is the beginning step to incarnational listening. Number 2, step into their shoes and feel what they are feeling. Listening means that we affirm the humanity and the experience of the other person. It means valuing them in such a way that you put them above yourself. Or as the book of Philippians chapter 2 says, do not do anything out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. So maybe, I'll just throw this out there, if you're in a relationship and you're the spouse that does most of the talking, this is an opportunity for you, in humility, value the other person. Hey, what do you think about this? What is the most demanding thing in your life? Hey, do you want to talk about anything? And then you begin to step into their shoes to hear what they're feeling, experiencing. There was one spouse on this call that said, I don't want my spouse to hear me. I want my spouse to feel me. And there's a difference between the two. Number 3, avoid judging or interrupting. Judging or interpreting. Avoid judging or interpreting. I do this all the time, especially as a pastor, because I immediately assume that when people come to me and talk to me, that I need to interpret what they're saying and then to offer them advice. It's like clockwork. Like that's how my brain works. And I've been in conversations where I said, so good, it looks like this is what you need to do. And they said, no, that's not what I meant. I meant this. Right? And they have to explain it again, and then I finally get it. Why? Because I'm so busy interpreting that I'm not listening to what they're saying. This is number 3, the third step to avoid to incarnational listening. Number 4, reflect back as accurately as you can what you heard them say. Think about names, right? Like how many names do we forget when we meet people? So take that concept and apply it to conversations. So in this cohort, we're looking at each other, and my wife shares. And here was the rule that I hated. Every sentence she said, I had to repeat it back to her. So she started off by saying, well, I'm having this difficult situation at work with one of my employees. She paused, and I had to go, so what I'm hearing is that you're having a difficult situation with one of your employees at work. And I did it the first time. I'm saying, do we have to do this? Like this? But we did it for 20 minutes. It was uncomfortable, it was wooden, it was like the breaking of bones and reshaping them so they can grow. And here's the thing, I still remember exactly everything she told me in that conversation. I took it in. So reflect back as accurately as you can what you heard them say. And you can practice that with your spouses. It might feel awkward, but the more you do it, the less you'll have to do it. Number 5, when you think they are done, ask, is there more? A lot of times we're in a rush, right? Like the person we're talking to finishes and we're going, yes, they're done, I can keep moving. But this is us being intentional, entering into their world. Imagine how the person you speak to would feel if you were having a conversation with them and they looked you in the eye and said, hey, is there anything more you want to talk about? When's the last time someone wanted to listen to you that type of way? Number 6, this might be the most important question to ask. When they are finally done, ask them, of everything you have shared, what is the most important thing you want me to remember? So there was that 20-minute conversation with me and my spouse. We both shared the one thing. I shared with her, this is the one thing. I don't want you to remember all the details. This is the one thing that I would love for you to remember from this conversation. Think about how transformative this would be for your relationship, your marriages, your friendships, your parenting, with your coworkers, with your employees, and so forth. People are longing to be heard. In fact, I bet you are. When's the last time you felt heard this type of way? When's the last time you felt listened to this type of way? People are longing to be listened to. Yet, at times, we just get caught up with everything else. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, one of the greatest theologians of the past century, he said this: the first service that we owe to others in fellowship, or to other Christians, or to others that we encounter, consists in listening to them. That is the first service we can offer to others, he says. Just as love to God begins with listening to His word, so the beginning of our love for our brothers or sisters is learning to listen to them. It is God's love for us that He not only gives us in His word, but also lends us His ear. In other words, he's saying the first thing that you and I have access to is a God who hears us. The first thing that we should offer to others is a listening ear. People don't want to be just heard. They want to be felt. They want to be listened to. There's a study that was done by young adults in a Barna study, and they said that they are leaving the church because Christians don't really want to listen to them. Churches don't really want to hear what they're going through or what they're experiencing or what they're feeling. They just want to tell them, here's how you should act. And we're good at that part, right? Think about what Christians are known for. We're good at telling people how to act. And there is some of that when you come to Jesus, and when you've accepted Jesus, there is learning what it means to be in the family of God. We learned that last week. But how many relationships could you actually enter into with people if Christians were known, if we were known as a people for being good listeners? I love this Eugene Peterson quote. He says this: the question to ask is not how many people have I told about Christ, but how many people have I listened to in Christ? The question to ask is not how many people have I told about Christ, but how many people have I listened to in Christ? And I want to end with this idea that our listening, our ability to listen to others, is rooted in our ability to pause and listen to God. Bonhoeffer, he says it another way. He says this: those who can no longer listen to their brother or sister will soon be no longer listening to God either. He will be doing nothing but prattle in the presence of God as well. We see this in the story of Mary and Martha. We get so busy with everything else in life that not only do we have a hard time listening to others, we have a hard time listening to God. So Martha is actively serving Jesus. She's getting the house ready and cooking, and Jesus and his disciples are in town. But she misses him at the same time. Her life was defined by duty and shoulds and have-tos and pressures and distractions. Martha's problem goes beyond momentary busyness. Her life was unscattered and fragmented. She's touchy, she's irritable, she's blaming her sister in that moment. And here's one of the surest signs, Pete Scazzaro says, that her life is out of order, is that Martha goes to the point of telling Jesus what to do. She says, Jesus, tell Mary that she should be helping me. Mary, on the other hand, is active in a different way. She sits at the feet of Jesus, listening to him, focused on being with Jesus, enjoying communion with him and loving him. And Jesus says she has chosen what is better. One of the best things that we can do as followers of Jesus is to posture ourselves in such a way that we just sit before God. And a lot of times, it's in silence. And the last thing that our minds and our hearts and our bodies want is to sit in silence before God. So every morning I make it a point to spend about 30 seconds to a minute in silence before God, saying, I have nothing to say to you right now. I just want to sit before you. I'm not offering anything. I just want to receive. I just want to listen. And this will be so transformative for us because as we do that, we begin to be able to listen to God in such a way that we can truly be present with others as well. So here's what we're going to do. As we end, we're going to spend a couple minutes, about a minute and a half in silence. I know we're going over a little bit, but because we're in a rush, right? We got things to do. We got things to get to. But I want us to practice what it means to just posture ourselves before God. So I want you to bow your heads, everybody here. Just bow your heads. We're going to cut the keys and the music because the music feels so good, right? Now it feels so awkward. But here's the thing. This is how your Monday morning will feel. Your Tuesday morning and your Wednesday morning and your Friday night. And the moment that you want to be with God, this is how it will feel. It will feel wooded and uncomfortable. And everything in you wants to speak about something else. Everything in you wants to get up and leave. Everything in you cannot handle just pausing. As the people of God, God has called us to reclaim this lost art of listening to God and listening to others. So over the next minute and a half, I want you to think about not doing anything for God, not offering any prayers to God, but simply listening, knowing that your Heavenly Father sees you, knowing that He loves you, knowing that He is for you. Just receive His love as you listen. And we'll continue in a few minutes.